Get rid of it. 3 words. That's all it took for Derek to throw away the only woman who ever loved him. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, is that the shivering, pregnant woman he just tossed into the snow like yesterday's trash. She had a number given to her 10 years ago by a bleeding, half-dead boy she saved in a dark alley. A boy who made her one promise: call me when you need a life saved. She never called. Not once in 10 years. Tonight, she finally dialed, and the man who answered wasn't a boy anymore. He was the most dangerous man in the entire Korean underworld. And he had been waiting for that call every single day for a decade. This is the story of how one act of kindness bought a woman a throne she never knew existed. The snow came down like glass, sharp, relentless. The kind of cold that doesn't just freeze your skin, it freezes your hope. Keyla could barely feel her fingers anymore. Her coat, a faded, oversized thing she'd had since college, was soaked through, clinging to her body like a second layer of exhaustion. Her hair was matted against her face from the freezing rain, her lips cracked, her breath coming out in short, desperate clouds. But she wasn't shaking because of the cold. She was shaking because of him. Derek stood in the doorway behind her, arms folded, jaw tight, watching her the way you watch something you've already decided to throw away. No guilt, no hesitation. Just the dead, hollow stare of a man who had already done the math and decided she wasn't worth the cost. I said, get rid of it, Keyla. His voice cut through the wind like a blade. You think I'm playing? The Syndicate is pulling up tonight to collect what I owe, and I am not going down because you want to play mommy. She turned slowly. Snow clung to her eyelashes, her stomach, round, heavy with life, pressed against the thin fabric of her coat. And even now, even thrown out like nothing, even standing, ankle deep in slush with nowhere to go, she was beautiful. Not the kind of beautiful the world rewards. Not glamorous, not polished. The kind of beautiful that survives. The kind that holds its ground even when everything is falling apart. Derek. Her voice cracked. It's below freezing. I have nowhere to go. Not my problem. He stepped back inside and the door slammed like a gunshot. And just like that, she was alone. The street was empty. The world was silent. And somewhere deep in her coat pocket, beneath the lint and the old receipts, and the crumbled pieces of a life that never quite came together, her frozen fingers found it. A torn piece of paper. Yellowed. Creased 100 times over. 10 years old. 1 phone number. She stared at it. Her breath trembled. She hadn't thought about this number in years, hadn't let herself think about it. Because the boy who gave it to her was gone, vanished from that alley like smoke, and people who vanish don't come back. But tonight, standing in the snow, pregnant, broke, discarded, Keyla had nothing left to lose. She dialed. It rang once, twice, click. Silence on the other end, not static, not a voicemail, just someone breathing, listening, waiting. As if whoever was on the other end of that line had been sitting by that phone for 10 years, praying for it to ring. It's me, she whispered. I don't know if you remember. A voice answered. Low, calm, terrifyingly controlled. The kind of voice that doesn't raise itself because it has never needed to. Where are you? Not a question, a command. Halfway across the city, on the 43rd floor of a glass tower that overlooked the frozen skyline, Sang-Ook, the most feared, most lethal, most untouchable boss the Korean underworld had ever produced, was standing at the head of a mahogany table surrounded by 12 of the most powerful men in organized crime. A multi-million-dollar arms negotiation was mid-sentence. Billions were on the table. Entire territories hung in the balance. None of it mattered. Because on the burner phone in his left hand, a phone that had not rung in 10 years, a phone he charged every single night just in case. The only number he ever saved was calling. He stood up slowly. His chair didn't make a sound. Every man in the room went silent, not because he told them to, but because when Sang-Ook moved, the air itself learned to be still. His face was carved from stone, a bespoke charcoal suit, a heavy cashmere overcoat draped across his shoulders, leather gloves, and just barely visible beneath the sharp line of his collar, the edge of ink. Syndicate tattoos, the kind that aren't chosen, the kind that are earned. In blood, in silence, in years of violence most men wouldn't survive. He looked at his men. His voice was absolute zero. "We are leaving. Now." No one asked where. No one asked why. Because the men in that room had seen Sang-Ook break bones without blinking, collapse entire empires without raising his voice, and erase powerful men from existence like they were typos in a sentence. But they had never, not once, seen him move this fast. 5 minutes later, a convoy of black-armored SUVs tore through the frozen streets. No sirens, no lights. Just the low, predatory rumble of engines moving with terrifying purpose. And back on that frozen sidewalk, still clutching the phone to her ear, Keyla heard something that made her blood stop. The sound of doors opening, one after another. After another. She looked up. The entire street was filled with black vehicles. Men in dark suits stepped out in silence, forming a perimeter with military precision. And in the center of it all, one door opened last. A man stepped out into the snow, tall, immaculate, radiating the kind of power that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't have to. His eyes swept the scene. The broken suitcase, the slush-covered sidewalk, the trembling woman standing alone in the fire, cold, and something behind his gaze shattered. Not weakness, not softness, recognition. He knew those eyes. He had carried them in his memory for 10 years. The eyes of the only person in this world who had ever looked at him, broken and bleeding in a filthy alley and chosen to stay. Now, before we go any further, if you've ever had someone in your life who didn't see your worth until it was too late, drop a comment right now. Tell me, did they ever come back? Because what happens next in this story is going to hit different. But before the SUVs, before the snow, before the most dangerous man in Korea dropped to his knees for a pregnant woman on a frozen sidewalk, there was an alley, and a girl with $4 to her name who made a decision that would reshape the entire Korean underworld. She just didn't know it yet. 10 years earlier, Keyla had exactly $4.37. She'd counted it 3 times in the checkout line, praying the cashier wouldn't see her hands shaking. 1 styrofoam container of jjajangmyeon, black bean noodles, the cheapest hot meal on the menu, and a bottle of water. That was dinner. That was breakfast. That was everything until financial aid hit in 6 days. She was 19. A sophomore running on caffeine and stubbornness, working 2 campus jobs that barely covered textbooks. Her coat, a $3 thrift store find from the previous winter, had a broken zipper and a hole in the left pocket she kept meaning to sew shut. The rain that night was brutal. Not just rain, a freezing, sideways assault that made you question every life choice that had led you to be outside at 11:30 on a Tuesday. She was cutting through the alley behind the convenience store when she heard it. Not a groan, not a cry, something worse, a breath. The kind of shallow, rattling exhale that comes from a body deciding whether or not to keep going. Every survival instinct told her to keep walking. The alley was dark. The rain was punishing, and girls who stop in dark alleys at midnight don't always make it home. But Keyla had a defect. Her mother's word for it. Half joking, half worried. She could not walk past someone in pain. physically impossible. Something in her chest would lock up like a door refusing to close, and she'd stand there, unable to move, until she'd at least looked. So she looked. He was crumpled against the wall behind a dumpster. A boy, 17, maybe 18, folded in on himself like something dropped from a height. Clothes torn, face a mess of blood and swelling beneath the rain. Someone had beaten him, not in a fair fight. This was the kind of damage that came from people making a point. His eyes were half open, dark, glassy, staring at nothing. She thought she was saving a dying stranger. She had no idea she was feeding the future king of the Korean underworld his last meal as a nobody. Keyla crouched down, set her only meal on the wet concrete, and said 5 words that would alter the trajectory of 2 lives forever. "Hey, can you sit up?" He flinched. Not from pain, from shock. Like the concept of someone speaking to him didn't fit any reality he understood. He had fully expected to die in that alley. And here was this girl, soaked, shivering, broke, opening a styrofoam container and breaking cheap wooden chopsticks like death wasn't even an option she was willing to consider. "Eat," she said. Not gentle, not pitying, just firm. The way you talk to someone when you need them to understand that giving up is not available. He ate, slowly, painfully. His jaw was damaged, and every bite made him wince. But he ate because she was watching him with those eyes, steady, unafraid, burning with a quiet ferocity that had nothing to do with physical strength. When the food was gone, she did something that stopped his heart. She took off her coat, the broken zipper, hole in the pocket, $3 thrift store coat that was the only thing between her and hypothermia, and draped it over his shoulders. "What are you doing?" he rasped, voice barely there, accent thick enough to tell her Korean was his first language. "You're freezing." "So are you." "I'll walk fast." He stared at her, and something shifted behind those dark, glassy eyes, something tectonic, something that wouldn't reveal itself for another decade. He reached into his torn pocket with fingers that could barely close and pulled out a scrap of paper. A receipt, ripped in half. He had nothing to write with, so he used his own blood, still wet on his fingertips, to scratch a series of numbers onto the paper. He held it out to her. "If you ever need a life saved," he whispered, "call this number." She took it. Not because she believed him, he looked like he could barely save himself, but because refusing a dying boy's gesture felt like a cruelty she wasn't capable of. "What's your name?" she asked, but when she looked up, the space beside the dumpster was empty. Just rain, the blood-streaked wall, and the faint outline of where his body had been. Gone. Like smoke. Like something that was never meant to be witnessed. What happened to Sang-Ook after that alley? How does a bleeding, half-dead teenager become the most feared crime lord in Korea in just 10 years? That story, his rise, is one for another time. Keyla stood alone in that alley for a long time, holding a torn receipt with a phone number written in blood. Then she folded it carefully, slipped it into the pocket of her jeans, not the coat, because the coat had a hole, and walked home in the freezing rain, shivering so hard her teeth ached. She kept the paper. She didn't know why. For 10 years she kept it. 10 years later, Keyla was still the same woman who couldn't walk past someone in pain. The problem was, the person causing her the most pain was sleeping in her bed every night. The pregnancy test showed 2 lines at 6:47 on a Thursday morning, and for exactly 11 seconds, Keyla felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. It bloomed warm and reckless in her chest. She pressed her hand to her stomach and closed her eyes and let herself imagine, just for a moment, that this could be the beginning of something beautiful. A family. A reason. A tiny heartbeat that would make all the years of this is fine. This is enough actually means something. Then Derek came home. She knew something was wrong before he opened his mouth. That look. The one she'd learned to read over 3 years of excuses. The tight jaw, restless hands, eyes darting to the door like he was calculating escape routes. He smelled like cigarettes and bad decisions. She held up the test. 2 pink lines. Undeniable. The hope in her chest waited. Derek looked at the test, then at her, then at the test again. And the expression that crossed his face wasn't joy, wasn't shock, wasn't even fear. It was calculation. The cold, mechanical math of a man measuring a new problem against a pile of existing ones and realizing the numbers didn't work. No, he said, just that. Like she'd suggested a vacation they couldn't afford. Derek. Keyla, no, this cannot happen right now. He was pacing, running both hands over his head. His phone buzzed on the counter and he flinched like it had bitten him. What do you mean it can't happen? I owe people money, Keyla. The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that arrives when a truth hiding in the walls finally claws its way into the open. Not rent money, not credit card money. The kind of money that comes with consequences measured in broken bones and missing persons reports. While Keyla had been working double shifts, stretching grocery budgets, convincing herself that his late nights were hustle, Derek had been gambling. Underground poker rooms, high-stakes tables run by men whose patience had expiration dates, and the men he owed weren't debt collectors. With phone calls and court orders, they were the Korean Syndicate, and the amount was millions. Derek owed millions to the Korean Syndicate, the same syndicate whose boss had been searching for a specific woman for 10 years. But Derek didn't know that. He didn't know that the debt and the woman and the boy from the alley were all connected. Not yet. How much? Keyla whispered. He wouldn't look at her. Derek. How much? Enough that if I don't figure something out in 48 hours, they're coming here. To this house. And they are not coming to talk. She stared at him. At this man she'd given 3 years to. Cooked for, cleaned for, lied to herself for. And she understood, with surgical clarity, that she had never been a partner. She'd been a placeholder. A warm body useful only as long as she didn't complicate the equation. The baby complicated the equation. Get rid of it, he said quietly. Matter of fact. And the calm in his voice was somehow worse than screaming. No. His head snapped up. I said no, Derek. That was the moment the mask came off, all at once, like a curtain dropping, and behind it was a selfishness so deep it didn't even recognize other people as real. The storm hit at 9 p.m. like a punishment. Snow and freezing rain, the kind of weather that makes the news tell people to stay inside. The temperature dropped below 0 and kept falling. Derek threw her bag out the front door at 9:14. It wasn't even a proper suitcase. A faded duffel bag, overstuffed, zipper half broken, that hit the icy steps and split open, scattering clothes across the frozen pavement like debris from a life that had just detonated. Get out. No coat. He hadn't given her time to grab one, just a thin sweater, leggings, house shoes that dissolve in wet weather. Her belly pressed against the sweater, round and undeniable. Derek, it's below freezing. The baby. He grabbed her arm. Hard. The kind of grip that leaves fingerprints that turn purple by morning. Pulled her to the threshold and shoved her forward. She stumbled down the steps, catching the railing just before her stomach hit concrete. I told you to get rid of it, he spat. You didn't listen. Figure it out on your own. The syndicate is coming tonight, and I need this house clean. No crying baby mama, no baggage, nothing that makes me look weak. She looked up at him from the bottom of the steps, snow settling in her hair, fingers going numb. And even now, Some fractured, exhausted part of her brain tried to find the excuse. He's just stressed. He doesn't mean it. But her hand was on her stomach. And the life inside her was real. For the first time in 3 years, Keyla chose the truth over the lie. "You're a coward," she said, quiet, steady, snow falling around her like static. The door slammed so hard the porch light shattered. Derek made one critical error that night. Not the gambling, not the cruelty, not even throwing a pregnant woman into a snowstorm. His mistake was simpler than that. He forgot to ask himself one question. Who gave Keyla that phone number she's been hiding for 10 years? She picked up what she could. Walked. One foot in front of the other. Arms wrapped around her belly like a shield. Snow soaked through her shoes in under a minute. Wind cut through her sweater like it wasn't there. 4 blocks before her legs gave out. A bus stop. Cracked plastic bench. Flickering yellow light. She sank down and curled forward, forehead to her knees, and for one long, terrible moment, let herself break. The sobs came from somewhere deep, not just tonight, not just Derek, but every moment she had ever swallowed her own worth to make someone else comfortable. When the sobs slowed, her hand, almost on its own, like muscle memory from a life she'd almost forgotten, reached into the deepest fold of her bag. Her fingers found paper, old, soft, folded so many times the creases had become permanent. She pulled it out. The numbers were still there, not ink, blood. A boy's blood, scratched onto a receipt in a rain-soaked alley a lifetime ago. If you ever need a life saved, call this number. 10 years. She had kept this number for 10 years without understanding why. It had survived apartment moves, breakups, career changes, moments where she'd cleaned out her bag and thrown away everything except this one scrap. Her hand always hesitated over, always kept, always returned to its hidden pocket like a secret she was saving for a moment she prayed would never come. The moment had come. Her fingers were so cold they could barely navigate the screen. She typed the number. Her thumb hovered over call. He's probably dead. Or the number's disconnected. People don't keep promises for 10 years. She pressed call. It rang. Once, twice, then a click. Not a voicemail. Not disconnection. A living, breathing click, followed by silence so controlled it felt like the other end of the line was holding the entire world still. 43 floors above the frozen city, inside a penthouse boardroom lined with bulletproof glass, Sang-Ook sat at the head of a mahogany table surrounded by 12 of the most dangerous men in East Asia's criminal underground. A weapons deal worth $47 million was being finalized. Armed guards at every exit. Cigar smoke thick in the air. Sang-Ook was not the same boy from the alley. The years had carved him into something precise and lethal. Bespoke charcoal suit. Cashmere overcoat draped over his chair. Leather gloves beside untouched whiskey. Beneath the collar, ink. Syndicate tattoos tracing from collarbone to shoulders, each representing a chapter of violence that had carried him from a bleeding teenager to the single most powerful underworld figure the Korean Syndicate had ever produced. He had built this empire in 10 years. Every deal, every territory seized, every rival crushed. Constructed with the cold, methodical fury of a man with something to prove, to someone who would never see it. But he kept the phone, a burner, old model, charged every single night for a decade, placed on his bedside table like a prayer. His men, lieutenants, enforcers, the inner circle who'd watched him dismantle criminal organizations without flinching, they knew about the phone. They knew never to touch it. Never to ask. And they knew, from the way his eyes would drift to it in the early hours, that whoever was supposed to call that number was the only thing in this world their boss was afraid of losing. There's a tradition in certain Korean crime families, an untraceable phone kept for a single purpose, a single person, a single debt of honor. In the Syndicate, they call it a Yongwon Yuibiche, a forever debt. Sang-Ook's men had heard of the tradition. They had never seen anyone actually keep one for 10 years. It rang, small sound, almost quaint in the bulletproof silence. But the effect was seismic. Every man at the table froze, not because of the sound, but because of what happened to Sang-Ook's face. The mask didn't crack. It evaporated. The cold expression he wore like armor dissolved in a single breath, and what was left was raw. Something human, something desperate, something sealed behind concrete and steel for 10 years that was now clawing its way out. He looked at the screen. Her number. He answered. Silence. Then breathing. Shaky. Uneven. Someone who had been crying for a long time. It's me. I don't know if you remember. Where are you? 3 words. The absolute, terrifying certainty of a man who has rehearsed this moment 10,000 times. She told him. He hung up. He stood. The room didn't breathe. 12 of the most powerful criminals on the continent watched him button his overcoat, pull on his gloves 1 finger at a time, and speak in a voice quieter than any of them had ever heard. We are leaving. Now. All of us. Every vehicle. Every man. His lieutenant hesitated. 1 second. Sir, the deal. The 47 million. Did I stutter? They left. All of them. Contracts unsigned. $47 million evaporating like it never existed. Because to Sang-Ook, it hadn't. It was numbers. It was paper. And the woman on the other end of that phone was the only currency he had ever valued. Keyla was still on the bench when she heard the engines. Not 1. Not 2. A sound. Low. Guttural. Synchronized. Like the heartbeat of something massive moving through the snow. Headlights cutting through the storm. 1 pair, then 3, then 6, then too many to count, flooding the dark street with blinding white light. Black SUVs, armored Rolls-Royces, tinted windows reflecting nothing but falling snow. Moving in formation, precise, predatory, sealing every exit like a net closing around prey. But they hadn't come for prey. Doors opened. Men stepped out, dozens, dark suits, dark coats. Disciplined silence more frightening than any shouting. They formed a corridor. A human pathway from the lead vehicle to the bus stop where Keyla sat frozen, duffel clutched to her chest. The last door opened. He stepped into the storm, taller than she remembered, sharper. Everything about him radiating power that didn't need to be announced because the air reorganized around him. He walked toward her, slow, deliberate. His men parted without being told. And then, behind her, a door slammed. Derek. He'd seen the convoy from the window. Came stumbling out in a half-buttoned shirt, eyes wild, sweat on his forehead despite the cold. He saw the SUVs, saw the men, and his face cycled through terror, confusion, then a desperate, sickening flash of opportunity. Hey, hey! Derek jogged toward the convoy, hands raised, voice cracking into a grin that looked like a wound. You're the Syndicate, right? About my debt? I can explain. I just need more time. Nobody looked at him. Not one suited man turned his head. Derek's grin faltered. His eyes found Keyla, found the man walking toward her. The calculation happened fast. The same cold, selfish arithmetic that had defined every decision he'd ever made. He lunged forward, grabbed Keyla's arm, the same bruising grip, and dragged her off the bench. Wait, I've got something better than money. His voice was shaking, high-pitched. He shoved Keyla forward and she stumbled, catching herself before her belly hit the ground. Take her. Her and the kid. That clears my debt, right? She's young, healthy, a gift. We're square. In the Korean Syndicate, there is a code, an unspoken law older than any boss alive. You do not touch what belongs to the organization. You do not offer a woman as currency. And above all, you do not put your hands on someone under the boss's protection. The punishment for this offense has no appeal, no negotiation, and no survivors. Derek had just broken all 3 laws in 12 seconds. The street went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that happens in the half-second before something irreversible. Every hand moved toward concealed weapons. The air pressure dropped like the moment before a detonation. And every man in that convoy understood that what was about to happen to the fool who had just touched that woman would be something they would never speak of again. Sang-Ook stopped walking, 10 feet from Keyla, close enough to see her face clearly for the first time in a decade. The snow in her hair, the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her arms wrapped around her stomach, protecting something precious, doing it alone, tired. He looked at her. She looked at him. And the recognition hit like a collision. Instant, total. A decade collapsing into a single, shattering moment. She knew those eyes. She'd seen them once before. Glassy, half dead in a dark alley, staring up at her like she was the first kind thing the world had ever offered. The boy from the alley. Alive. Powerful. Here. His expression, the one that had terrified boardrooms and silenced rivals and made grown men look away, crumbled. Not into weakness, into something far more dangerous. The raw, unfiltered devotion of a man who had spent 10 years building a kingdom for a woman who gave him noodles when he was dying. He took off his overcoat, the cashmere one, and with hands that had orchestrated violence on a continental scale, he draped it over her trembling shoulders with a gentleness so absolute it made 2 of his men look away, snow falling between them. His voice barely a whisper, but every man on that street heard it. You kept my number. Not a question, a revelation. A man discovering the one miracle he'd staked his existence on had just come true. Keyla's lip trembled. A tear cut down her frozen cheek. You answered, she whispered. And behind them, still gripping nothing, still wearing that broken grin, Derek watched the most powerful man in the Korean underworld drop to his knees in the slush, not in defeat, in worship. Now, right now, drop a comment and tell me, what do you think Sang-Ook is about to do to Derek? Because I promise you, whatever you're imagining, it's worse. Derek was still talking. That was the thing about men like Derek. Even standing at the edge of their own destruction, they couldn't stop performing. Couldn't stop believing that the right combination of words and cowardice could buy them 1 more hour of a life they didn't deserve. So we're good, right? His voice climbing, cracking like cheap glass. He gestured at Keyla the way you gesture at something you're trying to return for store credit. She's healthy. Pregnant too. 2 for 1. That's more than fair. That's generous. He was grinning. That desperate, wet grin of a man who has confused the silence before a hurricane with the calm after one. Nobody answered him. Sang-Ook rose slowly from his knees. Not rushed, not dramatic. With the controlled precision of a man who has learned that the most terrifying thing in any room is calm. His suit was soaking through at the knees. He didn't care. He didn't notice. He stood to his full height, adjusted his cuffs. No overcoat now, just the suit in the snow. And the cold didn't touch him because men like Sang-Ook had moved past the reach of weather a long time ago. He turned, and for the first time he looked at Derek. It was a brief look. Clinical. The way a surgeon examines something that needs to be removed. Derek's grin survived approximately 1.5 seconds of that gaze before collapsing into something pale and twitching. "You," Sang-Ook said. Quiet. Conversational. The kind of quiet that smart men recognize as the most dangerous frequency a human voice can reach. "You are the one who owes me money." The word "me" landed like a brick through a window. "Wait, you're the boss? You're the one they call—" "I am not interested in what they call me." One step. Toward Derek. Derek stumbled back like the ground shifted beneath him. "I am interested in what you just did. You offered this woman—" The pause had weight, had teeth. As payment. Derek thought he was making a deal. Sang-Ook thought Derek was writing his own death certificate. Only one of them was right. Derek's eyes darted between Sang-Ook and Keyla, and for the first time, a splinter of understanding pierced through the fog of his selfishness. The boss wasn't looking at Keyla the way a creditor looks at collateral. He was looking at her the way cathedrals look at altars. Listen, I didn't mean... I was just... You offered her, and I accept." Relief flooded Derek's face so fast it was almost comical. "Yeah? Okay. So we're square? The debt is cleared." Derek exhaled. Shoulders dropped. He even had the audacity to smile. The grin of a man who believes he's just escaped the consequences of his cruelty through sheer luck. He was wrong. "However, ago, she belongs to me. She is under my ago, she belongs to me. She is under my protection. She carries my authority. Every man on this street, every soldier in my organization, every arm of the syndicate across 6 countries, they answer to me. And now, by extension, they answer to her." Snow falling. Derek's frozen smile looking more and more like a wound that wouldn't close. "Which means," Sang-Ook continued, close enough now that Derek could see the tattoos beneath his collar. The history of violence inked into skin. "That when you grabbed her arm tonight, when you bruised the arm of the woman who is now, by your own words, syndicate royalty, you committed an offense." Derek shook his head. Small, rapid movements. "No, that's not... I didn't know." "You didn't know." Sang-Ook tasted the words like something rotten. "You didn't know that the pregnant woman you threw into a snowstorm, the woman whose arm you grabbed hard enough to leave marks, the woman you tried to trade, was untouchable." He leaned in, close enough that Derek could feel the words on his face. "You're right. You didn't know. But ignorance has never been a defense in my world. And in my world, the price for touching a queen is not negotiable." Derek shattered. Not slowly. All at once, like something hollow. He dropped to his knees, not in worship, like Sang-Ook had done, but in the frantic, graceless collapse of a man who just realized the ground beneath him was never solid. Please, I'll do anything. I'll leave. Disappear." Sang-Ook straightened, adjusted his cuffs, looked at his lieutenant, the one who had questioned leaving the $47 million deal, and gave a single, imperceptible nod. "Make sure he understands. Thoroughly." His voice returning to that terrifying conversational register. "And then make sure he disappears." Not the kind of disappearing he offered to do himself, the permanent kind. 2 men stepped forward. Derek screamed. The sound was swallowed by snow, wind, and the absolute indifference of 27 armed men who didn't so much as blink. Sang-Ook turned his back on Derek as if the man had already ceased to exist. Because in every way that mattered, he had. Every fairy tale ends with the knight saving the princess. This one was different. Because Sang-Ook wasn't saving Keyla, he was repaying her. 10 years ago, she was the knight. Tonight, he was just returning the favor. With an army. Sang-Ook walked back to Keyla. She was standing now, still wrapped in his coat, still shaking, but standing. Chin lifted slightly, hand steady on her belly. She had watched everything, heard every word. And her eyes, when they met his, weren't filled with fear. They were filled with the slow, overwhelming realization that the universe had been keeping a receipt for 10 years, and tonight, it was finally settling the account. He stopped in front of her, close, not touching. Because Sang-Ook understood something Derek never had and never would. That proximity to a woman like Keyla was a privilege, not a right. You didn't reach for it, you earned it. By showing up in a snowstorm with an army and your knees in the slush and your coat on her shoulders, and absolutely nothing left to prove. Come with me, he said. Not a command, an offering. The most powerful man in the Korean underworld asking permission from a pregnant woman at a bus stop. She nodded. He opened the rear door of the lead vehicle himself. Not a lieutenant. Not a driver. Him. The heated air hit Keyla's face like a wave, and her body reacted before her mind could. Shoulders dropped, eyes closed, and a small, involuntary sound escaped her lips. The sound of someone who has been holding themselves together by sheer will and has finally been given permission to stop. The leather seat was warm, a cashmere blanket already draped across the back seat. Because he had called ahead during the drive, because of course he had, because a man who charges a burner phone every night for 10 years is a man who thinks of blankets. He crouched at the open door, eye level with her, and carefully, reverently, with hands that had signed death warrants and built empires, he reached toward her stomach. He stopped just short, fingers hovering, asking with his eyes what his voice wouldn't presume to demand. Keyla took his hand and placed it on her belly. The baby kicked. And something happened to Sang-Ook's face that his men had never seen and would never fully describe to each other in the years that followed. The mask didn't crack. It dissolved. Every layer of armor, every wall, every defense mechanism built over a decade of commanding men who killed for a living, vanished between one heartbeat and the next. His jaw tightened. His eyes went bright. He blinked once, hard, and a single tear cut down his cheek, catching the light before disappearing into the sharp line of his jaw. He didn't wipe it. He let it fall. Then he stood, turned to face his men. Every soldier, every lieutenant, every driver and enforcer standing at attention in the snow, and he spoke. Not loudly. He never spoke loudly, but his voice carried the way thunder carries. This woman is Keyla. She saved my life before any of you knew my name. 27 men stood straighter. The child she carries will inherit everything I have built and everything I will build. From this moment, this child is the heir to the Syndicate. They will lack nothing. They will fear nothing. And anyone, in this city, this country, or this world, who causes either of them a single moment of discomfort will answer to every man standing on this street tonight, and every man who has ever sworn loyalty to my name. He paused. Let the snow absorb his words. Prepare the estate. The Syndicate has a new heir. 27 men bowed, not rehearsed, not a performance, a reflex, because every man in that convoy understood they had just witnessed something they would tell their children about. The night the boss found the woman. The night the phone finally rang. Sang-Ook got into the car beside Keyla. The door closed. The convoy moved, silent, synchronized, cutting through the storm like a blade. And Keyla, for the first time in years, leaned her head back and let her eyes close. She was asleep before they reached the highway. In Korean Syndicate tradition, when a boss publicly declares an heir, every allied family must send a representative to acknowledge the new bloodline within 72 hours. By the time Keyla woke up, delegations from 6 countries were already in the air. But that's a story for another time. 12 hours ago, she was freezing on a bus stop bench with 4 bruises on her arm and nowhere to go. Now she was waking up in a penthouse that didn't appear on any public record, in a bed that felt like it had been designed specifically for her body, in a room full of details that only one person in the world could have known. Morning arrived like a whisper. Keyla woke up slowly, not the way she usually woke. Abrupt, anxious, already calculating problems before her eyes were open. This was different. This was warm. The kind of waking that happens when your body has been so deeply, thoroughly safe that it forgets to be afraid. She blinked. High ceiling. White. Golden light pouring through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a skyline she didn't recognize. A bed that felt like it had been engineered for the specific purpose of holding her body. White sheets, duvet so soft it barely had texture, pillows that smelled faintly of lavender. She sat up, hand moving instinctively to her stomach. The baby shifted. Still there. Still safe. The room was enormous. Marble floors with heated panels she could feel. Through the blankets, a walk-in closet with glass doors, rows of clothing in her exact size. Not guesses, not approximations. Her size. Because a man who spends 10 years searching for a woman learns everything. A vanity stocked with products she recognized from shelves she'd never been able to afford. And a single vase of fresh peonies, her favorite flower. A detail she had mentioned exactly once, to a bleeding boy in an alley, when he'd asked what made her happy, and she'd answered without thinking. She remembered. He remembered. She got out of bed, feet touching warm marble, silk robe draped over a chair. She put it on and walked to the window, and the city spread below like a map of someone else's life. The Han River glinting in winter sun, the skyline sharp against pale blue sky. Last night's snow already melting like a bad dream evaporating. A penthouse, a fortress. The kind of building that doesn't have a doorbell because nobody arrives uninvited. The door opened behind her. Sang-Ook entered carrying a tray. Different in the morning light. Still sharp, still precise. Fresh white shirt, open at the collar, sleeves rolled to the forearms where the edges of his tattoos traced patterns she couldn't quite read. But his face was softer. Not the boardroom mask, not the kneel in the snow intensity. Just present. A man in a doorway holding a tray, looking at a woman like he still couldn't believe she was real. He set it on the bedside table. Keyla looked down. A styrofoam container. The same kind. The exact same kind. From the corner store near her old campus. Inside, jjajangmyeon. Black bean noodles. The same dish. The same cheap wooden chopsticks. The same bottle of water. $4.37. The meal she bought him in the alley. Her hand flew to her mouth. Not from sadness. Because something so much bigger was rising in her chest. Something with the weight and warmth of 10 years of quiet, unspoken loyalty finally making itself visible. He had remembered. Not just the gesture, not just the concept, the exact meal. The same container, the same chopsticks, the same everything. As if he'd been carrying that moment in his chest the same way she'd carried his number in her pocket, carefully, secretly, every single day for a decade. You... Her voice broke. She tried again. You remembered. Sang-Ook stood by the window. Morning light cutting across his face, illuminating the sharp angles and the soft eyes, and the ink beneath his collar, and the steady, unshakable certainty of a man who had built everything on a single foundation. I remember everything, he said quietly. The rain, the noodles, your coat with the broken zipper. The way you said eat, like it wasn't a request. He paused. I remember that you were the only person in my entire life who looked at me, bleeding and worthless in a gutter, and decided I was worth saving. He took a step toward her, then stopped. Still not presuming. Still earning it. I have spent 10 years building all of this. His hand moved, not gesturing at the penthouse, not at the skyline, but at everything. The empire, the army, the billions, the fortress. Not for power, not for money. I built it because I made a promise in an alley that if you ever needed a life saved, I would answer. And I wanted to make sure that when you called, I would have enough to give you everything. Keyla's tears were falling freely, not the desperate broken sobs from the bus stop. These were warm. The tears of a woman who had spent her whole life settling for less than she deserved and was finally standing inside the answer to a prayer she'd been too afraid to say out loud. She looked at the noodles. She looked at him. She looked at the city below and the silk robe and the peonies and the warm marble under her feet and the life growing in her belly. The life that, 12 hours ago, a coward had told her to destroy. She picked up the chopsticks. "Sit down," she said. The same voice, the same tone. Firm, steady, unbreakable. The voice of a woman who feeds a stranger in a storm because she cannot walk past someone in pain. "Eat with me?" Sang-Ook sat, and for the first time in 10 years, neither of them was alone. Outside the penthouse windows, the snow had stopped. The sun was climbing. And somewhere far below in the city that had no idea what had happened on a frozen street last night, the world kept spinning. Indifferent, ordinary, unchanged. But in this room, everything had changed. A girl who gave away her last meal had become a queen. A boy who was left to die had become her shield. And a baby who was never supposed to exist was now the most protected life on the entire continent. But here's what Keyla doesn't know yet. What Sang-Ook hasn't told her. What even his closest lieutenants only whisper about. There's a reason he was bleeding in that alley 10 years ago. A reason he was beaten and left to die. And the people who did it, they're still out there. And they just found out their old target is now the most powerful man in Korea. That story is coming. Now, if this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that kindness doesn't expire, that the smallest thing you do for someone, a meal, a coat, a moment where you chose to stay when every instinct told you to walk away, can come back to you in ways you never imagined, then subscribe to this channel. Not for me, for the stories, because we have more coming. Stories about love that crosses continents, loyalty that outlasts decades, and the kind of devotion that burns so deep it rewrites the rules of the world. Hit subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I would love to say hello, just to know how far our story is reaching. And if someone in your life needs to hear that their kindness matters, share this with them. Because this story started with one woman and one act of kindness, and now it's in your hands. Let's see how far we can carry it together.